Hello and namaste to all of you. Today in our UPSC GS series, we are doing under sustainable development the point number 7th, and that is inequitable growth. Before this, up to audio 10, we have covered under sustainable development unit 6 and unit 7, introduction and indicators of inequality. In this audio number 11, we will do development of exclusion, bridging the gap, that is relationship with sustainability, state initiatives, community-led initiatives, and summary of the inequitable growth. General instructions for students are same, and that is listen the audio number 11 very carefully and note down 10 words from this audio number 11. Inequitable growth. Under this, point number 7.3, development and exclusion. Development and exclusion. The 1950s, after the Second World War, ushered in the era of economic growth in both the developing and the developed countries. However, the developing countries soon lagged behind. The developed countries revived the institutional framework of capitalism, and the international economic order became liberal. The policies of low non-agricultural tariffs and few quantitative restrictions on the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) countries quickly paved the way for the expansion of international trade. The factors formally established in OECD, that is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) countries were: number 1, highly productivity; number 2, innovations through research and development; number 3, rapid capital accumulation; number 4, well functioning markets; number 5, growing demand; number 6, high rates of human resource growth; number 7, maintaining high employment standards by the governments. On the other hand, the developing countries, most of whom had become independent in the 1950s, adopted a dualistic structure of growth. The earliest phases of development involved a significant rise in the primary exports. Gradually, however, there was a sharp decline in this, and the structure was changed to manufacturing instead of exports of primary products, and a shift in agricultural labors to industry adversely affecting the primary production levels. The second impact came from the population growth in these countries. Rising phenomenon of urbanization with a rise in educated unemployed youth became a persistent feature. Since agricultural productivity did not rise rapidly, cheap cereals were imported, which substituted for the domestic grain production. The incentives to the farmers were kept deliberately low to provide low priced food to consumers in cities and for workers with low wages in manufacturing sector. In manufacturing, technology was imported, and there were negligible innovations in indigenous technologies. The adoption of foreign technology that required highly skilled and lesser number of workers resulted in their failure to absorb the ever increasing unskilled labor force. In summary, the chief factors of the prevailing poverty and inequities are: number one, economic dualism; number two, lack of attention to rural development; number three, capital dependent growth; number fourth, urban bias in provision of education and social services; number five, rapid population growth; number six, weak institutional support to the poor; number seventh, inequality of income distribution. The North-South Divide and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade (GATT). General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade (GATT). With the end of the Second World War, when most of the developing countries achieved independence, it was hoped that the world under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade (GATT) community would move towards strengthening ties in different fields like trade, investment, science and technology, and promote the economic growth and development of all the member countries. However, in the matters of global trade, the developed North continued to dominate the largely underdeveloped South. The rules and regulations that governed by world trade were manipulated to serve the needs and interests of the developed nations. The disparity that existed between the North and the South in terms of economic growth, resource utilization, and technological development continued. There was enormous pressure on the developing countries to change their economic strategies strategies to facilitate the inflow of capital and affiliates of transnational corporations (TNCs) into their economies. In the 1940s, the United States and Britain felt the need to build an international financial system that would help in creating an open world economy and promote international trade, growth, and development. Basically, it was envisioned to rebuild the European nations and Japan after the Second World War. The agreement was signed by 44 countries and resulted in the creation of the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the World Bank. Subsequent to this, the General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade (GATT) came into being. Under the GATT system, these member countries agreed to lower trade barriers and not to resort to unfair or managed trade. The very purpose of GATT was to ensure free and fair trade and open multilateralism and, and open multilateralism and the extension of trade rules to all without any discrimination. The Dillon Round 1947 to 61 cut tariffs by 73% and the Kennedy Round 1963 to 67 resulted in approximately 33% reduction of trade barriers and preferential treatment to export from developing countries. Efforts towards further trade liberalization were made in the Tokyo Round 1973 to 79 that had few comprehensive results. It decided on tariff reductions on industrial products, liberalization of agricultural trade, and further concessions to the demands of the developing countries and their exports. The Uruguay Round 1986 to 1994 attempted to reduce or even eliminate many import quotas and subsidies. Accords on agriculture, services, trade related intellectual property rights TRIPS, and trade related investment measures TRIMS followed. A significant development during this trade round was the establishment of the World Trade Organization WTO, replacing the GATT system. GATT and its weaknesses. In spite of achieving moderate success in the reduction of trade barriers, the very purpose of defeating protectionist protectionist tendencies could not be accomplished. Institutional weaknesses handicapped the GATT agenda to take care of diverse and complex national interests. Its original stature as the center of trade rules for nations interested in market liberalization was weakened. There was a significant departure from the principles of most favored nation, elimination of quantitative restrictions, and the non-discrimination rules. There were repeated setbacks for free and fair trade. In the agricultural sector, a crucial sector for the developing countries, many of the rules became ineffective as one developed nation after another avoided the implementation of the prescribed disciplines on agriculture. The GATT forum became a platform for non-cooperation towards binding agreements. The nations were unwilling to change their traditional political and economic structures. Even amongst the developed countries, competition between the United States, Japan, and the European community made it difficult to arrive at consensus on various issues at the GATT forum. The incomplete coverage of all countries led to series of problems. Most of the members of the GATT could not join at its inception, and their subsequent incorporation had raised difficulties which they had to confront. There was an increasing pressure to modify the rules according to the needs of developing countries. The developed countries found GATT as a base for pursuing their political and economic interests, thereby overlooking the foundational and often legal aspects associated with the forum. This non-compliance and violation of commitments had major implications in weakening the system. The protectionist the protectionist tendencies gathered momentum, but the interest of the developing countries, especially in areas like agriculture, steel, and textiles, could not be taken care of. The developing countries were on the receiving end of this trend, with pressures on opening up of these sectors for free imports without assurance of similar steps being taken by developed countries. There was a departure from the non-discrimination rule and an increase in the application of the non-tariff barriers like voluntary export restraints. The developed countries disrespected GATT, their domestic norms with unilateral trade policies were promoted. The GATT is often criticized for its inability to secure agreement among many countries with diverse interests. Its slowness to act, its limited agenda, and its inability to enforce established disciplines. World Trade Organization, the WTO, which had replaced the GATT as the supreme organization in the trade related matters, as much more authority than GATT and greater compliance mechanisms. The institutional structure is much stronger and also provides greater legal coherence with regard to trade disputes. However, the influence of the developed world in the areas of governing rules and decision making processes continues as before. The decision of the developed countries to group together the environmental and labor standards in trade issues for negotiations has been an ongoing contentious issue with the developing countries. While the United States and the European Union have been insisting on the incorporating these issues into trade regimes, there is a strong opposition from others, especially from developing countries. The advocates of the advocates of environmental protection are insisting on using trade measures to promote environmental objectives. They perceive trade liberalization where the commercial interests overrule environmental concerns as a threat to international or national environment protection efforts. The conflict over labor standards is an important issue. It is argued that the proper platform to address this issue is the International Labour Organization ILO. This issue was raised by the organized labor and human rights activists activists to ensure fair practices, prohibition of child labor, human rights, and provide basic rights and decent conditions to the labor. There is a growing concern, especially amongst developing countries, that this could provide a rationale to develop nations to adopt protectionist measures and unduly complicate trade negotiations. The developing countries are vehemently vehemently opposing the incorporation of these issues. The developed countries' standards of fair practices, it is feared, would reduce the comparative advantage of developing countries based on low wage labor and provision of only minimum welfare benefits presently affordable by them. Nevertheless, the unity forced forced by the developing nations to resist these insensitivities these insensitivities and to pursue their legitimate rights was best reflected in the deliberations of WTO Summit at Cancun in 2003. Cancun in Mexico in 2003. Point 4. Bridging the gap. Bridging the gap. The realization of sustainable development will require the bridging of gap of inequities between the North and the South. The developing countries realized the importance of a unified negotiating strategy to resist the domination of the North. The generalized system of trade preferences GSTP and call for a new international economic order NIEU in various United Nations conference on trade and development even CTAD meetings had strengthened their position but without gain. The trade rounds rather than enhancing The potential of the developing countries' economic growth resulted in the North gaining a comparative advantage with regard to agricultural issues and service related agreements. The disadvantages suffered by the developing countries provided an impetus to forge an increased South-South cooperation in trade and investment issues. South-South cooperation in developing countries for the last few decades have come together to promote their economic and social advancement through different fora such as non-aligned movement, NAM, G77 and through regional alignments. Through this, they hoped to bridge the gap between the rich and poor member nations and cope up with the existing structures governing international economic relations. A common platform to voice their concerns is termed as South-South cooperation. The basic objective is to strengthen not only the economic interdependence in the region but also achieve self-reliant development based on the principles of equality, justice, and mutual benefit. The identified areas of cooperation include agriculture and industry, energy, utilization of human resources, raw materials, and technical skills. While South-South cooperation has been successful in bringing the pertinent issues to the notice of the developed bloc, it needs to formulate strong international policies too. Number one, present factual position of the developed countries to the international community. Number two, develop a broad-based and equitable system of mutual cooperation between the North and South. Number three, seek technical and institutional support and financial assistance to pursue developmental process. Number four, bring about sustained progress and development by ensuring stability and peace in the region. Number five, continue the reform process in agriculture, including food security and rural development. Number six, form a network of developing countries in the areas of indigenous technology, research, and communications. In addition to the existing inequities at the global level, the inequities at the national level should also be given due importance. Efforts should be made at the regional, district, and village levels to bridge the gap. 4.1, relationship with sustainability. The countries of the world are interconnected through the global environment with the activities of the country affecting the other. The policy of sustainable development is therefore applicable to both the developed and developing countries. Numerous examples over the years have shown that the malpractices of one country, especially the industrialized countries, have adversely affected the people, socio-economic conditions, and environment of a neighboring country or even the far-flung countries. The industrialized countries have just 20% of the world population but consume about 80% of the world resources. They contribute a major share to the global environmental degradation process, both through exploitation of natural resources and pollution that transcends boundaries and barriers. The less developed countries have to equally bear the brunt of environment degradation despite little or no fault of theirs. Therefore, it becomes the moral responsibility of the developed countries to adopt policies and measures that are not detrimental to the global environment. The exploitative policies of the industrial nations towards the natural resources of the developing world, their unfair trade practices by imposing tariffs, trade barriers, and inaccessibility in inaccessibility to their markets, and the interference of the West controlled international institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank in the national policies are largely seen as an infringement upon the sovereignty of these states. Under these circumstances, the efforts of sustainable development cannot bear fruit. Similarly, the developing countries need to look into their own methods and measures to adopt the policy of sustainable development. In the wake of globalization and liberalization, these countries need to reorient and reframe their international and domestic policies not only to help stabilize their economies but also to take a unified stand in the international fora against exploitation. The most important development issue of the developing countries is economic growth, a mere imitation of the Western policy of industrialization and technologies without due consideration to processes that can be sustained in their own context is not viable for development. If the present trend of unmindful imitation continues in the developing countries, the outcome could be ruinous. Therefore, developing countries have to devise alternative policies and measures of achieving sustained economic development appropriate to their social and economic situations and resource endowment, both human and physical. These countries should develop strategies to scientifically upgrade indigenous methods that have been proved sustainable over the centuries. Here, it needs to be understood that this alternative process of growth might not be as fast as that could be brought about by copying industrialization of the West, but it would be sustainable in the long run and may provide new insights and approaches to sustainable development even to the West. The other issues that need to be accorded equal importance are poverty, trade, human resource development, and equitable distribution of wealth. The unequal growth in the urban and rural areas in the developing countries alike is obvious it and needs to be addressed on a priority basis. For example, in India, around 70% of the areas is rural. Therefore, sustainable development initiatives in the rural sector become all the more important if India has to gain the status of a developed country. Several such initiatives taken at the state and community levels are discussed in the following sections. 4.2 State initiatives. After independence, the Indian government set to the task of rebuilding the national economy. The government, under the leadership of Nehru, adopted through a 5-year planning process the principles of mixed economy, promotion of the private sector, and a strong intervention of the state and an industrial base in the public sector. As discussed earlier, the policy of import substitution and self imposed insulation from the global economy resulted, however, in slow growth. It is clearly understood that restrictive trade and exchange trade policies under centrally initiated and public sector oriented industrialization were impediments to the fast pace of development till the 1980s. However, the radical shift in the trade policies since 1991 mark a move towards globalization and liberalization. Economic reforms. The economic reform policies of 1990s were brought in with focus on stabilization of the economy on one hand and liberalization on the other. These led to substantive deregulation on private participation in economic activities and withdrawal of several import and export restrictions besides other changes. These measures were expected to bring in competition, leading to better utilization and allocations for accelerating growth. The major elements of policy reforms are: number one, private investment freed from industrial license from government. Number two, reduction in the list of industries for public sector. Number three, quantitative controls on most intermediate and capital goods abolished and those on consumer goods to be abolished in the phased manner. Number four, orange tariff rates brought down with reduction in dispersion of rates. Number five, restrictions relaxed on exports of some agricultural commodities. Number six, restrictions relaxed on foreign private investment. The outcome of these reforms has been encouraging with a per capita real growth of 4.7% of per annum GDP in 1991 to 97 from 3.4% in 1980 to 91. Environment policy. The Government of India has formulated legislation, regulations and policy instruments to address matters concerning environmental issues for sustainable development at sub-regional, regional and international level. Some selected policy initiatives taken by the Ministry of Environment and Forests towards sustainable development. Number one, National Environmental Action Plan for Control of Pollution. Number two, Urban Pollution. Number three, Vehicular Pollution. Number four, Environmental Epidemiological Studies. Environmental epidemiological studies. Number five, Environmental Management System (EMS). Number six, Uniform Consent Procedure. Number seven, City Afforestation Program for Mitigation Pollution. Number seven, National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan (NBSAP). Number eight, Biosafety Protocol. Number nine, Rules on the Management of Lead Acid Batteries. Number 10, Regional Development Strategy based on Carrying Capacity Concept. Number 11, Development of Management Tools for Preventing Environmental Degradation. Number 12, Establishment of Indian Center for Promotion of Cleaner Technologies ICPC. Number 13, Water Quality Standards for Sewage. Number 14, Technology for Sewage Treatment. Number 15, Water Conservation through Recycling. Number 16, Joint Forest Management. Number 17, National Forest Action Program. Number 18, National Forestry Research Plan. Development of agro-industry. In the first 5-year plan, the agriculture, development and village industries were taken up as the twin development issues. It was visualized that increased agricultural produce raise farmers' incomes and opportunities for processing raw materials through village cottage industries. The Planning Commission covered Among others, these village industries for development, khadi, coir, oil, fisheries, sericulture, forests, dairying, dairying, leather, handmade paper, and horticulture. The subsequent plans also stressed the role of the agriculture-based village industries. The objectives were number one, to create immediate and long-term employment on a large scale at a relatively small capital cost. Number two, to meet a substantial part of increased demand for goods by the large-scale industries and its integration with the small-scale industries. Number three, to facilitate mobilization of resources of capital and skill. These policies are now better appreciated as the products of village and craft industries have gradually found markets among the urban elites, organized large enterprises within and outside the country. In addition, the relationship between agriculture and industry became close. The industry began to supply inputs to agriculture in terms of machinery, fertilizers, etc. Large scale production of food grains, fruits, and vegetables and their processing emerged. The food processing industries (FPI) came up in the 80s simultaneously with the entry of the transnational corporations (TNCs) into the Indian market. The earlier official policy on private foreign capital in food industries went through a substantial change in the late 80s. The establishment of the Ministry of Food Processing Industries (MFPI) was a major step towards realizing the policy of permitting large TNCs and Indian companies into the FPI sector. The MFPI is obliged to create increased job opportunities in the rural areas with specific reference to women and unemployed youth by development of primary produce through a network of units. The number of collaborations with foreign FPIs increased 2.5 times in a matter of 7 years as compared to the previous 30 years. For example, Pepsi entered into collaboration with Punjab Agro Industries Corporation and the Tatas to establish processing facilities for tomato juice and paste along with soft drink concentrates. Marine products, seeds, and fruits became prominent areas of FPIs. Integrated Rural Development Program. The World Bank defines rural development as improving the living standards of the masses of the low income population residing in rural areas, making the process of rural development sustainable. Mahatma Gandhi had declared that political emancipation had no meaning unless it lifted the people from poverty and ignorance. He He initiated the 13-point program of rural development involving basic education, village industries, khadi, and other minimum requirements of the rural areas to improve the quality of life there. After independence, the national government adopted these ideas to launch a planned rural development program. The Integrated Rural Development Program was initiated in 1977 to generate employment among the rural population as single largest anti-poverty program for direct assistance by the government to the rural people. Number one, development of production potential of each area and utilization and upgradation of available human skills. Number two, development of cottage, poultry, fishery, forestry, and cottage industries to raise the living standards of the poor villagers. In addition, several other programs were initiated in different 5-year plans to promote rural development. They include industrialization of the backward areas, intensive development of agriculture, extension of irrigation, development of roads and road transport, provision for universal education, improvements in conditions of living and water supply, planning for tribal development, etc. Several developmental programs were also initiated for drought prone and flood prone areas. The following development initiatives by the government deserve special mention. Number one, area specific programs. Integrated Area Development Program, IADP, Whole Village Development Program, WVDP, Command Area Development Program, CAD, Drought Prone Area Program, DPAP, and Desert Development Program, DDP. Number two, Target Group Specific Programs, Small Farmers Development Agency, SFDA, Marginal Farmers and Landless Agency, MFLA, Antyodaya and Integrated Tribal Development Project, ITDP. Number three, Employment Programs, Crash Scheme for Rural Employment, CSRE, Food for Workers Program, FFWP, Pilot Intensive Rural Employment Program, PIREP, National Rural Employment Program, NREP, Rural Landless Employment Guarantee Program, RLEGP, Jawahar Rozgar Yojana, JRY, and Training for Rural Youth for Self-Employment, TRYSEM. Number 4, Social Welfare Programs, National Adult Education Program, NAEP, Minimum Needs Program, MNP, Applied Nutritional Program, ANP, and Integrated Child Development Project, ICDP. 4.3, Community led initiatives. In order to ensure the efficiency and sustainability of the development project, the participation of the local population is a must. It also strengthens self-help capacities and promotes democratization. The Indian initiatives for sustainable development through local public participation have been mainly through communities, cooperatives, and panchayats. Together, they have worked towards creating an environment of self sustained and self reliant community development. Panchayati Raj institutions or panchayats. These are local self government groups that have been in existence since a long time in Indian villages but over the years had become rather powerless, remaining at the margins of governance structures. In 1993, the government implemented the local self-help reform under the Panchayati Raj Act. Under this, the panchayats were given constitutional status, more power, functions, and financial resources at the district, block, and village level. The specific responsibilities of panchayats include the development of number 1, agriculture, number 2, land improvement, number 3, irrigation and watershed management, number 4, animal husbandry, dairy and poultry, number 5, minor forest produce, number 6, fisheries, number 7, social and farm forestry, number 8, small scale industries, number 9, khadi village and cottage industries, number 10, rural housing, number 11, roads, bridges and other means of communication, number 12, electrification, number 13, poverty alleviation, number 14, non-conventional energy, number 15, education and training, number 16, social and family welfare, number 17, public distribution system, number 18, maintenance of community assets, non-governmental organizations, NGOs. There are many voluntary and non-governmental organizations in India which have played a very important role in the developmental process through promoting socio-economic growth in both the rural and urban areas. Quite a few NGOs had come up due to the efforts of individuals who were inspired by the ideology of constructive program of Mahatma Gandhi. It is reported that the founders of one-fourth of the NGOs were inspired by Gandhi. Gandhi himself took the initiative in establishing the Kasturba Gandhi National Memorial Trust (KGNMT). The programs undertaken by the NGOs are mainly to improve the social, economic, educational, cultural, and environmental status of the tribals, the poor, and the oppressed classes. Besides their own programs, they also act as a bridge between the government and the people with regard to funds and development policies. Some of the broad programs undertaken by the NGOs are: number 1, agricultural development and animal husbandry; number 2, cottage and small scale industries; number 3, educational programs; number 4, health and sanitation; number 5, housing; number 6, social forestry; number 7, organization of the poor; number 8, welfare services; number 9, relief and rehabilitation; number 10, cultural programs; and number 11, environment and sustainable development. A large number of NGOs are also engaged in applying the results of scientific research and innovations to provide alternate and sustainable solutions to the problems of rural development. Summary of Unit 7. For an equitable growth and development, it is necessary to consider three major factors: capital accumulation, population growth, and technological progress. The quality and quantity of human resources play a key role in the economic development. While the developed countries traditionally remained in the forefront in the economic growth and development, the developing countries lagged behind due to the shortage of many essential resources, stalling their growth as the producers and manufacturers of goods and manufacturers of goods. The Western powers wielded considerable influence in the economic matters. The developing countries, to rid themselves from Western domination, forced unity to push forward their development agenda. Substantial efforts are being made by these countries to adopt policies that would strengthen the indigenous know-how and eco-friendly technology, for it is these methods, coupled with the governmental support and initiatives, that are crucial for the upliftment of the socio-economic environmental conditions of the developing world at large. It was the Unit 7 of Sustainable Development. Next audio number 12 we will do it next day. Thank you.